we now have Carlo Leali, have I said your name right? Yes. We do not have Nunzia Bezzola, but Carlo is going to represent both of them. Critical unschooling for a democratic idea of childhood and adolescence.
I'm Carlo Leali. I'm a former unschooler, and therefore I will talk about critical unschooling and how it can lead to a democratic idea of childhood and adolescence, as well as young adulthood. And, well, first of all, let's talk very briefly how our society deals with education in general. Well, according to cultural anthropology, self-perception of human beings depends on the solution each culture and society has found for some issues, such as primary needs like food or clothing and shelter, social organization, or environmental issues like climate, migration, war, agricultural and economical suitability, and, endemic diseases, for example, too. In particular, there's no evidence of a bigger influence on education of philosophical, pedagogical and psychological awareness rather than other dominant social influences like economical factors. In the same way, the idea we have of childhood and adolescence is strictly linked to these cultural aspects. In ancient farmer societies, for example, children were seen like small adults and adolescence simply didn't exist. In fact, adolescence was invented by Granville Stanley Hall, the first president of the American Psychological Association, and it is surely not a coincidence that this invention emerged in the USA between the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, at a time when the social changes caused by the spread of enrollments in public high schools were increasing at a much faster pace than population. Adolescence became a field of study only after the late 50s of this century, actually. Having the need to put adults at work outside the family context, industrial and post-industrial societies must provide a good childcare system, of course. That's one of the most impacting reasons why there are creche, nursery, kindergartens, and compulsory school, where babies, children, and teens must learn and experience what they nowadays could learn practically anywhere else. There is no evidence that kindergartens and schools are necessary to get a good education. Most school subjects can be learned anywhere and at any time. And thanks to new technologies, to libraries, to museums, and thanks to the opportunity to travel, that nowadays is much easier than in the past, learning experiences can be mostly universal. The experience of friendship and relationship to other young people doesn't need school classes to be gained. Any other place can provide it, theoretically. Separation is a key element in our social system. Children are separated from their families, not rarely already during the earliest childhood. They are sent to creche, later to kindergarten, and after that to school, where they spend most of the day with strangers. At school or kindergarten, siblings are also separated from each other depending on their age. Babies, children and teens spend their days in very delimited places where they are also separated from the world and the community or village. They are expected to stay there at least as much time as the parents do at work. If not, they generally must provide justification. There is a sort of moral obligation to stay at kindergarten or school every day and all day long, except for weekends. That's why we can talk of age-based segregation. Children and teens are expected to listen to adults, but have not the right to be listened to. They are expected to learn the way they live and what they'll become, but they don't have the right to choose, organize and schedule the learning activities or processes. Babies, children and teens are allowed to do certain things depending on their age, like for example, in the school world, being part of school boards and committees, where decisions about their education and their school life are made. In Italy, for example, they can only be part of them from the age of 14, that is in secondary school. Furthermore, in Italian schools, they generally can't move independently from one room to another inside the school building until the age of 19. They must be with a teacher or an adult or have their permission. They can't leave the school building without their parents or another parent or their teachers. Most Western European and South American languages, such as Italian, French, Spanish, German, Portuguese, and these are just examples, translate the word you differently if addressed to a child or teen or to an adult. They also prescribe a different way to say hello or goodbye depending on age or friendship, but mainly age. As a language is the expression of a culture and of a Weltanschauung, worldview, it would be interesting to understand if this use might be considered the expression of an implicit cultural and psychological discrimination. In today's Western society, children and teens before 18 can't begin to work, to take responsibility for themselves, and aren't able to build up their independence from their original family. A child or an adolescent is still often considered a minor or non-aged, not mature enough to legally engage in an activity of mostly any kind, or to exercise some rights independently. In everyday life, they are often seen as inferior to adults. They must be taught, educated, and shown what is right and what is wrong. This view is the same colonists have about colonized people when they believe the latter must be civilized. Children and teens are seen as immature, unpredictable, capricious, unreliable, and irresponsible, incapable of making important decisions. Adolescence is often seen as the age of mood disruptions, conflicts with parents, and risky behavior. As a consequence, adults' attitude is based on a lack of trust. All this, together with separation and discrimination, necessarily brings to external control, prohibition and imposition, and also on punishment-reward dynamics. There is a dominant age and a dominated one, where people dream, of course, of becoming dominant. That's the reason why people rarely speak to children in the same way, in the same tone, with the same flattering words, the same voice and volume they do with the principal or another adult. The idea of childhood and adolescence is functional to the needs of neoliberalism. Children must be quiet and not make troubles until they've grown up and become consumers and perhaps also producers. Lack of democracy combined with discrimination and segregation, with external control, prohibition and imposition, are the same dynamics of colonization and apartheid. Pretty hard, I know, but that's, at least I think, is the truth. Imperialism, colonialism and dictatorship and other kinds of authoritarian governments have always used school as one of their main tools for social control. Obedience, segregation, control, prohibition, punishment-reward dynamics are the values mass education is based on. School trains for efficiency and it rewards success. It has already been said in other speeches. Compulsory education is adult-centered because it's organized in a way it responds to adult necessities, not children necessities. While providing standardized learning and tests, school encourages homologation and conformism in order to provide an anonymous mass of consumers with predictable behaviors. Crash, kindergartens and schools effectively form young minds in a very strict way in order to create the habit of adult power and obedience and to train them for the future. This idea of childhood and adolescence has obvious weak points. It divides, trains to obedience but not to human rights. It is based on suspicion and not on trust. It develops competition, but not cooperation. Thank you. It teaches to accept prohibition, control and authoritarianism, and doesn't build up responsibility in decision making. In this way, it can't provide social justice or democracy, neither for the present nor for the future. Fortunately, there are other ways to provide education, also in Western contemporary societies, and I will just mention the experience of Sudbury Valley School. But most of these approaches must generally gain ground, this has also been said before, outside compulsory schooling, like for example in unschooling, and also in homeschooling, but mainly in unschooling. Unschooling is a learner-centered approach to education where children, teens and young adults are free to learn in an informal or non-formal way, in accordance with their learning style and in relationship to their parents, family, in the learning and living context. This approach is a self-learning practice. No teachers are required in self-directed or autonomous learning. Each child can build his or her own learning path depending on his or her interests, characteristics and learning style. Each child has the leading role in his or her learning process. This helps children and teens to learn soon to do things and make decisions without being influenced by adults. In this way, early autonomy and decision-making is achieved. No separation from family like parents, siblings, cousins or other types of broader family takes place in unschooling. There is no age-based segregation because children and teens can access all places in and outside their community or town or village or whatever. And they can meet people of all ages and cultures. On the contrary, while putting children and teens in contact with a multi-generational and multicultural context at any time, unschooling provides integration of younger people in everyday life and tends to build up strong intergenerational relationships. At least during the first years, academic disciplines are an unuseful and also harmful superstructure. Knowledge is first acquired in its complexity through life and experience. A detailed learning process comes after that and is mostly an interdisciplinary one. In this way, the learning approach is mostly informal or not formal, as I said before. Learning by doing, by playing, by trial and error. This kind of learning process has been compared to the scientific method. In this way, critical and autonomous thinking are encouraged. Learning to learn is stimulated. Parents usually trust their children's personal learning process. They support their interests and free play, as it was said before, which are seen as boosters of the learning process itself. Joy, and why not, sometimes also fun, in learning is a priority in unschooling families. Children and teens are allowed to learn without judgment or criticism and often see adults as facilitators. Judgment, prohibition, imposition are not necessary if you enjoy learning. That's quite obvious, I think. In this way, you can build up a strong self-esteem. Very important. So let's go very quickly, very briefly to critical unschooling, which is a type of unschooling, one of the many types of unschooling, in which the fundamental role of education for social justice is combined with a democratic idea of childhood and adolescence. Social justice is the fair distribution of opportunities, rights and treatment. Among its pillars are participation, human rights, diversity and equity. That's why parents who choose critical unschooling usually take to heart the respect of growing and learning times of individual characteristics of their children. They don't mind standardization or conformism. Children and teens have an active, participative role in the families or groups, as well as a leading role within their own learning process. They make decisions and take responsibility for it. They are treated the same way as adults. Parents choosing critical unschooling wants to achieve democratic education, so age-based segregation and discrimination are banned. Young people can spend most of the time with their family if they wish. They can take part in adults' conversations and/or activities and be involved in important decisions. I think I've actually finished my time. Okay. So, I cut a big part of my speech. Thank you anyway.
Yeah, and to discuss afterwards, maybe.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Carlo.